There were not many people who understood just how broad his interests were and how supportive he was of an astonishingly wide range.
For decades, Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth showed unwavering support and love for each other. However, after 70 years of marriage, Prince Philip made a shocking decision. He no longer wanted to live with the Queen. This unexpected move left the public wondering what went wrong. Was this decision personal, or was there more to the story? For years, the truth remained a mystery. But in a surprising revelation, Princess Anne, alongside King Charles and Prince Andrew, has finally revealed the real reason behind their father's departure. Stay tuned as we uncover the untold story of why Prince Philip didn't live with the Queen in Buckingham Palace. Princess Anne just revealed why Prince Philip didn't live with the Queen. Princess Anne, the only daughter of Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth, has left people stunned with her revelation. For years, there have been different speculations about why Prince Philip chose to leave Buckingham Palace and not live with the Queen in his final years. But now, the truth is finally out. Princess Anne, often called her father's favorite, has shared the real reason behind her father's decision, and her brothers, Prince Charles and Prince Andrew, have supported her claims. Stay tuned as we uncover the full story. Unlike the formal and distant relationship often seen in royal families, Princess Anne and her father, Prince Philip, shared a close bond. She was known as her father's girl, likely because of their similar traits of being outspoken, abrasive, stubborn, strong-willed, and sarcastic, and with a sharp sense of humor, which was often at the expense of others. They both enjoyed suffering fools and had little patience with those who didn't understand things as quickly as they did. But what stood out was their unwavering loyalty. Neither Prince Philip nor Princess Anne could see wrong in the other. Instead, they playfully criticize each other while maintaining deep respect. Over the years, Princess Anne witnessed what was happening between her parents, while her brothers were often preoccupied with their royal duties. Anne knew the truth and saw firsthand what lay behind the perfect smiles and perfect royal couple her parents presented to the world. But that's not all. Prince Philip also confided in his daughter about some of the challenges he faced in his marriage to Queen Elizabeth. However, to truly understand the reason why Prince Philip chose to move away, we need to go back to the beginning, when it all started, even before Princess Anne and her brothers were born. Queen Elizabeth, formerly Princess Elizabeth, first met Prince Philip, an exiled Greek prince, at a wedding in 1934. He was 13 and she was just 8 years old. However, there was no spark between them until 5 years later they met again. At this time, Princess Elizabeth was 13 and Prince Philip was 18. However, the princess wasn't alone. Her parents and sister were on a visit to the Britannia Royal Naval College, Dartmouth, Devon. They were meant to meet with some of the cadets, and Philip was one of them. But things didn't go as planned due to an outbreak of mumps and chickenpox during the visit. Instead of attending a chapel service like they were supposed to, they spent time in the headmaster's house, and Prince Philip came to entertain the young princesses. He was one of those who weren't infected by the virus. Eventually, Philip got tired of sitting inside the house and asked the princesses to come outside. Instead, he began playing croquet, jumping over tennis nets, and displaying a carefree, athletic spirit. This caught Princess Elizabeth's attention, and from that moment, she fell in love. She later claimed that she never had eyes for anyone else after that day. After this encounter, the princess developed a strong teenage crush on Philip and began exchanging letters with him while he was serving with the Royal Navy during the war years. Elizabeth even kept a picture of him in her bedroom as a sign of admiration. By 1946, Philip returned from the Pacific Theater and his relationship with Princess Elizabeth blossomed. In June, he proposed to her on the grounds of Balmoral. In a letter dated back to 1946, he wrote, To have been spared in the war and seen victory, to have been given the chance to rest and to readjust myself, to have fallen in love completely and unreservedly, makes all one's personal and even the world's troubles seem small and petty. However, despite the proposal, Queen Elizabeth's father, King George VI, was reluctant about a marriage between them. He feared Elizabeth was too young and settling for the first man she met. Perhaps she would meet someone else and change her mind about Philip. Because of this, the royal family remained quiet about Philip's intention to marry Elizabeth. Additionally, there was some resistance to Philip's proposal within the royal family. Despite Philip being of royal lineage and direct descendants of Queen Victoria, making him and Elizabeth third cousins, many saw Philip to be too brusque, too unpolished, too German, too Greek, too un-English to marry Princess Elizabeth. But Elizabeth was insistent. She had made up her mind about Philip and was determined to marry him. It wasn't until a year later, in July 1947, after Elizabeth's 21st birthday, that a formal announcement was made on their engagement. Ahead of his marriage to Elizabeth, Philip had to renounce his Danish and Greek royal titles and become a member of the Church of England. Philip did this without hesitation because of his love for Elizabeth. Though he had been baptized in the Greek Orthodox Church, the Archbishop of Canterbury formally received Philip into the Church of England on October 3, 1947. He also adopted a new anglicized last name, Mountbatten. On November 20, 1947, Princess Elizabeth married Philip in Westminster Abbey in London. They later went for their honeymoon at the Broadlands in Hampshire, England, the home of Philip's uncle, Earl Mountbatten. But little did Philip know that his life was about to change in ways he never imagined. After the wedding, Prince Philip continued serving in the Navy, rapidly progressing through the ranks. A year later, they had their first son, Charles, followed by their daughter, Anne. Philip's naval career flourished, and he was eventually posted to Malta. Princess Elizabeth traveled to be with him while the kids stayed back in England. They enjoyed a relatively normal life for a short while, but everything in their lives was about to take a new turn. In 1952, King George fell ill and died. This was just 5 years after their marriage. Elizabeth and Philip's world turned upside down. Elizabeth, who was just 25 years old, was now the queen, and Philip, who was 30 years old, had to adjust to a new reality. They had thought they would have more time to live their own lives and enjoy themselves before Elizabeth ascended the throne. But fate had other plans. Now Elizabeth was going to become queen while her husband Philip, what was he to become? Not a king, but someone who would remain in the shadows of his wife, Queen Elizabeth. Although this was known all along, this was going to affect their whole relationship. Elizabeth's succession meant he had to give up any ambitions he might have had within the Royal Navy. For a man used to commanding ships, suddenly being relegated to a supporting role could not have been easy. And let's not forget, this was the 1950s, a time when it was extremely rare for a husband to be outranked and controlled by his wife. This was even more challenging for Philip, as his wife was the #1 citizen, which meant duty came first before family. This marked the beginning of a lifelong struggle for Philip, one that would eventually influence his decision to live apart from the Queen in his later years. But how did it happen? Stick around to find out. The challenges of royal life. Elizabeth and Philip were on a safari trip to Kenya when Philip informed her of her father's demise. Elizabeth knew what was expected of her, and they immediately headed back to the UK. Upon their arrival, Elizabeth became Queen Elizabeth II. But Philip's title remained unchanged. He wasn't named King Consort. Instead, he was given the title of Royal Consort. Regardless, Prince Philip showed unwavering support to his wife, leaving his career in the Royal Navy to serve the monarchy. But this was just the first of many changes. Next, they moved from their old residence, Clarence House, to Buckingham Palace. On June 2, 1953, a year after Queen Elizabeth had ascended to the throne. Her coronation took place at Westminster Abbey, London. After the Archbishop of Canterbury, Philip was the first to kneel in front of the new monarch, pledging to be her liegeman for life. But was he truly able to be this? It was easier said than done for a man to live under a woman's authority, leaving behind his aspirations and dreams to support Queen Elizabeth II. Philip also had to adjust to walking a few steps behind his wife in public instead of beside her. He later revealed that he thought he was going to have a long career in the Navy, but it soon became obvious that there was no hope, and he had to compromise. Philip accepted his new reality and tried to make the best of it. However, early conflicts arose between Elizabeth and Philip after she became queen. One of the most notable disputes happened when Philip's uncle, Louis Ducky Mountbatten, declared, "The House of Mountbatten now reigns in England." This implied that since Queen Elizabeth was married, her royal children would bear her husband's surname. However, Elizabeth's grandmother, Queen Mary, and Prime Minister Winston Churchill did not agree to this. They insisted Queen Elizabeth and her descendants would continue under the House of Windsor, maintaining her father's legacy. Philip was deeply offended by this decision and said he was nothing but a bloody amoeba, and the only man in the country who wasn't allowed to pass his name to his children. His words expressed his frustration and struggle to establish his identity within the monarchy and the challenges that lay ahead. When Queen Elizabeth heard her husband's words, she decided to make some changes, breaking long-standing tradition. In February 1960, she announced that her descendants would bear the surname Mountbatten Windsor, a combination of her and Prince Philip's surnames. While Elizabeth was the head of the monarchy, Prince Philip took on the role of royal consort, but his role wasn't clearly defined. He once told Geix Brandreth that he was often perceived as a refugee husband. Despite his effort to make the best of his position, he struggled to crave a meaningful role for himself within an institution centered on his wife, leaving him in the shadows. Prince Philip described his experience as royal consort as one of trial and error. Although he wasn't the first royal consort in history, he was faced with challenges with no clear precedent to follow. Prince Philip also admitted that when he asked what was expected of him as royal consort, people had no real answer and simply looked blank. However, one thing was clear to Philip: his first duty was to serve his wife, Queen Elizabeth, in the best way he could. This was in contrast to Prince Philip's dynamic, driven, and outspoken personality, much like his daughter, Princess Anne. But he carried it out with utter devotion.
For 70 years, Prince Philip walked 2 steps behind the Queen. In his final years, he chose to stand somewhere else entirely, more than 100 miles away, in a modest farmhouse on the edge of the Sandringham estate. It was not a scandal. It was not a rift. And yet for years, the public struggled to understand why a man so devoted to his wife would choose to live apart from her. The answer, it turns out, was never hidden in secret documents or whispered palace gossip. It was written plainly across 70 years of duty, sacrifice, and one man's quiet search for a life of his own. To understand why Prince Philip didn't live with the Queen in his final chapter, we have to go back to the very beginning, long before Buckingham Palace, long before the crown, to a teenage girl who fell in love with a penniless prince at a naval college in Dartmouth. Princess Elizabeth first crossed paths with Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark in 1934 at a family wedding, when she was just 8 years old and he was 13. Nothing came of that meeting, but 5 years later, in 1939, fate brought them together again. Elizabeth's parents had taken her and her sister Margaret to visit the Royal Naval College at Dartmouth, and among the cadets assigned to entertain the royal visitors was 18-year-old Philip. An outbreak of illness at the college disrupted the planned itinerary, and instead of a formal chapel service, Philip ended up spending the afternoon entertaining the young princesses himself, vaulting over tennis nets and showing off on the croquet lawn. Elizabeth, then 13, was captivated. She would later say she never had eyes for anyone else after that day. The two began exchanging letters while Philip served with the Royal Navy through the Second World War, and by the time he returned from the Pacific in 1946, their relationship had matured into something serious. Philip proposed at Balmoral that summer. In a letter to Elizabeth's mother, he wrote of having been spared by the war, of finally being given a chance to rest, and of falling in love completely and unreservedly, words that, he said, made all of one's personal and even the world's troubles feel small. But King George VI was hesitant. He worried his daughter was too young, too inexperienced, settling for the first man who had truly captured her attention. There was resistance elsewhere, too. Despite Philip's own royal lineage as a great-great-grandson of Queen Victoria, he was viewed by some in court circles as an outsider, a prince without a country, too foreign, too blunt, not quite fitting the image expected of a future consort. Elizabeth, however, was resolute. It would take until July 1947, shortly after her 21st birthday, before the engagement was formally announced. Ahead of the wedding, Philip renounced his Greek and Danish royal titles, converted from Greek Orthodoxy to the Church of England, and adopted the anglicized surname Mountbatten. On the 20th of November 1947, they were married at Westminster Abbey. Their early married life had a normalcy that would not last. Philip continued his naval career, rising through the ranks, and the couple welcomed their first son, Charles, in 1948, followed by Princess, and in 1950. When Philip was posted to Malta, Elizabeth joined him there, and for a brief window, they lived something resembling an ordinary military family's life. That window closed abruptly in February 1952, when King George VI died in his sleep at Sandringham. Elizabeth and Philip were on a royal tour in Kenya when the news reached them. Elizabeth, 25 years old, was now queen. Philip, 30, would spend the rest of his life adjusting to a role with no clear precedent, a husband whose wife outranked him, in an era when that arrangement was almost unheard of. The adjustment was not painless. Philip had to abandon any ambition of a long naval career, a sacrifice he later admitted he felt deeply. He was given the title of Prince Consort in practice, though never formally crowned king. At Elizabeth's coronation in 1953, it was Philip who knelt first before the new monarch, pledging his loyalty as her liegeman for life. Tensions surfaced early in their marriage over matters both symbolic and personal. One of the more well-documented disputes concerned the royal surname. Philip's uncle, Lord Louis Mountbatten, had declared that the House of Mountbatten now reigned in Britain, implying that Elizabeth's children would carry Philip's family name. Prime Minister Winston Churchill and Elizabeth's grandmother, Queen Mary, strongly opposed the idea, insisting the family remain under the House of Windsor. Philip, deeply offended, is widely reported to have remarked that he was the only man in the country not allowed to give his own children his name, calling himself, bitterly, nothing more than an amoeba. It wasn't until 1960 that Elizabeth, apparently moved by her husband's frustration, announced that her descendants would carry the surname Mountbatten Windsor, a compromise that acknowledged Philip's place in the family line without displacing the Windsor name itself. Despite these early friction points, Philip found ways to carve out a meaningful role. He pushed hard to modernize what he feared could become a fossilized institution. It was Philip who championed the idea of televising Elizabeth's 1953 coronation live, overriding objections from traditionalists who thought the ceremony too sacred for broadcast. More than 20 million people tuned in, a moment historians now regard as the beginning of the modern, more visible monarchy. He would go on to be the first member of the royal family to sit for a television interview, and later helped bring cameras into the family's private life for the 1969 documentary Royal Family. He encouraged Elizabeth to televise her annual Christmas broadcast starting in 1957, taught her to read from an autocue, and was reportedly the first royal to use a computer, writing his own correspondence and speeches. Behind the public image of a supporting husband was a genuinely restless, curious mind. By the 1980s, he had authored 9 books on subjects ranging from wildlife conservation to industrial design. Their marriage, like most long ones, held both real affection and real friction. Royal biographers, including Giles Brandreth, who interviewed Philip extensively for his book Philip and Elizabeth, Portrait of a Marriage, have described a dynamic in which Elizabeth deferred to Philip on family matters while retaining full authority over matters of state, an arrangement Philip found, in his own words, a matter of trial and error, without any clear rulebook to follow. There were also decades of rumor surrounding his fidelity, fueled by his flirtatious public manner, his membership in an all-male dining club, and his long cruises aboard the Royal Yacht Britannia in the 1950s. He was linked in tabloid speculation to a handful of women over the years, though none of these claims were ever substantiated, and Philip himself dismissed the idea, pointing out, with characteristic dry humor, that he was never once in public without a police escort in tow. Royal biographer Sarah Bradford, in her biography of Elizabeth, suggested Philip became notably more discreet in his social conduct after facing scrutiny in the mid-1950s. Ever tension existed between them in private, what the public record consistently shows is endurance. At their 50th wedding anniversary in 1997, Elizabeth publicly credited Philip as her, quote, strength and stay, unquote, throughout the years, words she repeated in various forms across their diamond and platinum anniversaries that followed. The real turning point toward separate living didn't arrive as a single dramatic event. It arrived gradually through age, retirement, and Philip's own long-stated wish to finally live life on his own terms. In May 2017, Buckingham Palace confirmed that the 95-year-old Duke of Edinburgh would step back from public duties. He carried out his final solo engagement that August, at the age of 96, appearing alongside the Royal Marines before formally retiring. As early as a 2011 interview, Philip had said plainly that he wanted the chance to enjoy himself, to step back from a lifetime of obligation. After retirement, he relocated from Buckingham Palace to Wood Farm, a modest house on the Sandringham estate once occupied by Prince John, the youngest and least publicly known son of King George V, who lived there quietly until his death in 1919. For Philip, the appeal was much the same: distance from ceremony and a measure of ordinary life he had never really been permitted as a working royal. When he arrived, he was reportedly startled to find a full staff of cooks and telephonists waiting for him, having hoped for something far simpler. Still, he made the most of it. Taking up carriage driving after arthritis in his wrists forced him to give up polo, painting in watercolors, and reading history, a genre he always preferred over fiction. This new arrangement meant the Queen and Prince Philip spent long stretches of time physically apart, something that would have been unthinkable earlier in their marriage. But by every account, it was not a separation in the estranged sense. They spoke by telephone daily. Elizabeth and other family members regularly visited Wood Farm, and Philip continued attending major family occasions, including the 2018 royal wedding of Princess Eugenie. Age brought other losses. Within a single year, Philip lost 3 close friends, along with his valet of 4 decades. Though he remained physically resilient well into his 90s, his short-term memory reportedly began to fade as he approached the century mark, a milestone he was said to be dreading rather than anticipating, disliking the fuss such occasions inevitably brought. Then came a genuine reversal, one that ties directly back to what the family later described as the true nature of Philip's final years. When the COVID-19 lockdown was announced in March 2020, Philip left Wood Farm and joined Elizabeth at Windsor Castle, where the two settled into what the household jokingly nicknamed HMS Bubble. For the first time in years, they were living under one roof, continuously, isolated together from the rest of the world, keeping in touch with family through video calls. On the 22nd of July that year, Philip made his last public appearance, stepping into the quadrangle at Windsor to formally hand over his role as Colonel-in-Chief of the Rifles. In January 2021, the couple was vaccinated against COVID-19 together at Windsor. The following month, Philip was admitted to King Edward VII Hospital as a precaution after feeling unwell, though he was able to walk and unassisted. He was treated for an infection and underwent a successful heart procedure before returning home. On the morning of the 9th of April, 2021, with Elizabeth at his side, Prince Philip died